Vamos procurar fixar a taxa de inflação em limites aceitáveis e controláveis. Isso vai obrigar-nos a impor regras rígidas de política cambial e de política fiscal.
How Angola pulled it off. The quiet rise of the non-oil economy. After decades held hostage to oil, Angola has achieved what few petrostates ever manage, building in under a decade a genuine second growth engine. Coffee, agriculture, mining, and currency reform explain the quiet success of diversification and the real benefits already reaching the lives of millions of Angolans. A 50-year journey.
Proclama solenemente perante a África e o mundo a independência de Angola.
To measure how far Angola has come, rewind to 11 p.m. on November 11, 1975. In Independence Square in Luanda, Agostinho Neto, the country's first president, declared, "Before Africa and the world, I proclaim the independence of Angola." That night, he had almost none of the instruments of a functioning state and an abundance of civil war, already raging on the ground between the three movements that had fought over decolonization, the MPLA of Agostinho Neto, Jonas Savimbi's UNITA, and Holden Roberto's FNLA. That war would last 27 years across four major cycles of fighting, 1975 to 76, 1979 to 91, 1992 to 99, and 1999 to 2002. Punctuated by fragile truces, the Bicesse Accords of 1991, the Lusaka Protocol of 1994, that always collapsed. By the time it ended, it had left more than 500,000 dead, more than 1 million internally displaced, and an estimated 4 to 5 million landmines sown across the country, a legacy that has maimed more than 80,000 Angolans to date. The end came by force of arms, not by treaty. On February 22, 2002, Jonas Savimbi was killed in combat near Lucas, in Moxico Province, and buried in Luena. Weeks later, on April 4, 2002 in Luanda, Generals Armando da Cruz Neto of the Angolan Armed Forces and Abreu Mwengo Ukwachitembo Camorteiro of UNITA signed the Luena Memorandum of Understanding in the presence of President José Eduardo dos Santos, sealing the peace. The following 2 decades split into 2 very different chapters. Between 2004 and 2008, with José Eduardo dos Santos still in the presidency, Angola's economy grew by an average of 17% a year, one of the fastest rates in the world, and GDP multiplied more than tenfold, from $7.8 billion in 1997 to roughly $83.4 billion by 2008. It was the era of oil-backed Chinese credit lines. In 2004 alone, China's Exim Bank offered $2 billion to rebuild roads, bridges, and railways that reconstructed Luanda and gave the country a semblance of normality. But growth still flowed from almost a single well. When oil prices fell more than 45% in the second half of 2014, Angola slid into recession for 5 consecutive years. GDP contracting 2.6% in 2016, 0.2% in 2017, 2.1% in 2018, 0.6% in 2019, and 5.2% in 2020, with inflation hitting 32% in 2017. It was precisely in 2017, the hardest year of that lost decade, that João Lourenço was sworn in as president on September 26th at the Antonio Agostinho Neto Memorial in Luanda, pledging renewal and transformation in continuity. Starting from a country that had just tallied 500,000 dead, a decades-long war against landmines, and 3 years of recession tied to a single export commodity, the following 9 years would turn into one of the most consistent economic recoveries in sub-Saharan Africa. The story that today's numbers tell. Nearly 5 decades on from that night in Independence Square, a camera panning across Angola today would find another country entirely. In Gabela, Kwanza Sul Province, the air smells of green coffee and fresh machinery. Sacks of Robusta pile up at the entrance of a factory that, a year ago, did not exist. Inside, the huller turns for the first time, and the sound is that of an economy shifting gear. The plant, spanning 10,000 square meters with initial capacity to process 1,144 tons a year, opened on July 6th and is the latest symbol of a success that, until recently, looked improbable. Angola, sub-Saharan. Africa's second-largest oil producer, a country that as recently as 2002 was still counting its dead by the thousand, has built, in under a decade, an economy no longer entirely dependent on the barrel. The numbers confirm the shift. In 2024, Angola's gross domestic product grew 4.4%, double the previous year's pace, driven by a non-oil sector that expanded 5.3%, according to the International Monetary Fund and Angola's National Statistics Institute, INE. By the fourth quarter of 2025, that divergence had sharpened further. Non-oil output rose 7.34% year-on-year, while crude production contracted 1.21%. Non-oil sectors have gained momentum, with trade, fisheries, construction, and some manufacturing segments registering measurable gains. The IMF's most recent assessment of Angola's economy concludes. The freshest data bear that out. In the first quarter of 2026, GDP grew 5.32%, with non-oil output accelerating to 6.22%, driven by a 27.63% jump in information and communications technology, while oil logged its fifth consecutive quarter of contraction, according to INE. The question that follows is easy to ask and hard to answer. How did Angola pull it off? The big picture. The answer starts with the country's foundation. Oil remains and will remain for many years a central pillar of Angola's economy, accounting for roughly 94% of total exports and 60% of state fiscal revenue, according to the IMF. That solid revenue base is precisely what has allowed the government to finance the transition toward a second growth engine. On growth, the performance has been unambiguous. Real GDP advanced 4.4% in 2024 against 1.1% in 2023, with the non-oil sector expanding 5.3% that same year, a pace that rose to 7.34% in the fourth quarter of 2025 and 6.22% in the first quarter of 2026, precisely as oil output retreated 0.21%, a fifth consecutive quarter of contraction. It is this sustained divergence, not an isolated episode, that underpins Minister of State José de Lima Massano's reading that economic diversification is something that has to happen. And that, in fact, is already happening. The productive base has also changed shape. Agriculture, which accounted for 13% of GDP in 2017, now makes up roughly 19%, growing at an average annual rate of 6%. Manufacturing, where food processing accounts for about a third of output, stands at 7.59% of GDP and returned to growth in 2024 after years of stagnation. The business fabric has kept pace. The number of new businesses created rose from 2,700 in 2012 to 38,715 in 2022. And cooperatives with access to financial and technical services climbed from 240 to 12,870 over the same period, according to the African Development Bank, AFDB, a sign, in the language the Minister of State for Economic Coordination himself uses, that the private sector has become absolutely decisive for the level of development Angola is pursuing. In foreign trade, coffee exports more than recovered, rising from 2,165 tons in 2024, plus 51%, to 3,288 tons in 2025, earning $12 million, and the PROPRIV Privatisation Programme has already put 109 state assets into private hands, with roughly $1.8 billion contracted between 2019 and 2024. On the social side, annual inflation eased from 27.5% in 2024 to 15.7% in 2025, with the Banco Nacional de Angola, BNA, projecting 13.5% for 2026, a path the Monetary Authority itself later revised even lower. While unemployment fell from 30.8% in the third quarter of 2024 to 26.9% in the same period of 2025. Even as 80% of total employment remains informal. The most recent signals confirm the shift. In the first quarter of 2026, GDP grew 5.32%. Year-on-year inflation eased to 10.11% in June, and the BNA cut its policy rate from 17% to 15.75% on July 14th, revising its year-end inflation forecast down to 8.6%. Timeline of a turnaround. Angola's diversification was not born of a single plan, but of a sequence of decisions taken over nearly a decade, many of them painful in the short term. The sequence begins in 2017, in Luanda, when João Lourenço is sworn in as president and launches a cycle of macroeconomic and institutional reform. In 2018, the Banco Nacional de Angola liberalizes the Kwanza's exchange rate regime on IMF advice, and Angola requests from the fund an extended arrangement worth $4.5 billion under the extended fund facility, running 3 years. That same year sees the launch of PROPRIV, the support program for production, export diversification, and import substitution. In August 2019, Presidential Decree No. 250/19 approves the Privatisation Programme, PROPRIV, initially covering 195 state assets and companies.
Começamos a ver que em termos de produção industrial, os empresários, quer nacionais, quer estrangeiros, que operam em Angola, estão também empenhados em aumentar a oferta de bens de consumo para as nossas populações.
The following 2 years, 2020 and 2021, are marked by the pandemic and oil price shocks and by debt renegotiation with creditors, including China. In 2022, João Lourenço is re-elected president in a general election. In June 2023, José de Lima Massano steps down after 2 terms running the Angola's central bank to be named Minister of State for Economic Coordination, and the government begins the gradual withdrawal of fuel subsidies, negotiated with the IMF to shore up public finances. That December, during a visit by João Lourenço to Washington, President Joe Biden announces American backing for the Libido Corridor, and Mucafé, the program supporting the Robusta coffee chain, gets underway. In 2024, concessionaire Libido Atlantic Railway takes over operation and maintenance of the Libido Corridor Railway, while GDP grows 4.4% against 1.1% in 2023. The non-oil sector expands 5.3%, and coffee exports rise 51% to 2,165 tons. In July 2025, a new coffee hulling and reprocessing plant opens in Gabela, Kwanza Sul with initial capacity of 1,144 tons a year. Through 2025, the BNA estimates non-oil GDP growth at 4.3%. Inflation eases from 27.5% to 15.7%, and unemployment falls from 30.8% to 26.9%. In the fourth quarter, the non-oil sector grows 7.34% year-on-year, while oil contracts 1.21%. By 2026, the first quarter confirms the trend. GDP grows 5.32%, non-oil accelerates to 6.22%, with information and communication technology up 27.63%, and oil contracts 0.21%, a 5th consecutive quarter of decline. In May, in Kigali, José de Lima Massano represents João Lourenço at the Africa CEO Forum and champions structural and irreversible reforms, casting agriculture as the central engine of diversification. In July, the BNA cuts its policy rate from 17% to 15.75% and revises its year-end inflation forecast down to 8.6%, reflecting the ongoing disinflation.
But if one looks to GDP and what is happening in our economy, agriculture is moving faster. And so in the last 10 years, basically, agriculture just doubled its weight on our economy. So 10 years ago, agriculture was around 14% of GDP, just below 14%, and today is roughly 25%.
And oil today?
And oil today is around 15%.
Wow.
Yeah, and agriculture is taking the lead.
How Angola pulled it off, 5 levers. The reforms stem from a political vision that João Lourenço set out as early as 2017, but their technical engineering has had, over the past decade, one common thread. José de Lima Massano, first as governor of the Banco Nacional de Angola, then, since 2023, as Minister of State for Economic Coordination, the post that now aligns monetary, fiscal, and sectoral policy along a single line, in service of what the minister himself calls a more predictable and competitive business environment. 1. Letting the currency breathe. In 2018, with José de Lima Massano serving his second term as governor of the Banco Nacional de Angola, the central bank liberalized the Kwanza's exchange rate regime on IMF advice, allowing a substantial depreciation against the dollar. The move, painful for importers and for real wages, corrected a currency misalignment that had for years artificially subsidized imports and penalized domestic production. It was, according to Angolan economic analysts, one of the most consequential economic policy shifts in Angola's post-war history. And it built on a distinction Massano had already earned in 2013 during his first term at the helm of the BNA, 2010 to 2015, when The Banker, a publication of the Financial Times Group, named him Africa's best central bank governor. 2. Cutting subsidies to pay for the rest. In June 2023, the government began the gradual withdrawal of fuel subsidies, which had cost the state budget roughly $13 billion between 2021 and 2024. The measure, without a rigid timetable and accompanied by social impact assessments with the IMF and the World Bank, is expected to free up more than $2.8 billion in 2026 alone. Part of that saving has been redirected into social programs and credit lines for the agricultural sector, part of what the Economic Coordination Team describes as an effort to let domestic production help ease inflationary pressures on households. 3. Selling off state companies and making room for the private sector. The Privatisation Programme, PROPRIV, approved by presidential decree in August 2019, initially covered 195 state assets and companies. Between 2019 and 2023, the state contracted roughly $1.8 billion from the sale of 78 companies, including stakes in insurer ENSA, lender BFA, Standard Bank, Unitel, and TV Cabo. The program has already generated nearly 2,000 new direct jobs in 5 years, an early result that should accelerate in PROPRIV's next phases and is already symbolic of a successful change in model. Less state as entrepreneur, more state as regulator. 4. Betting on concrete value chains, coffee, minerals, logistics. No single macroeconomic reform explains the new dynamism without concrete sectoral stories. Coffee is one of them. The provinces of Uige and Kwanza Sul, which account for 49.4% and 45% of national output respectively, have watched the revival of a crop that once made Angola, before independence, one of the world's largest Robusta producers. Coffee exports grew 51% in 2024 to 2,165 tons and reached 3,288 tons in 2025, earning $12 million. About 78% of production still comes from the smallholder sector, organized since 2023 around Mucafe, the technical training and credit program for coffee, backed by international support. The second story is the Lobito Corridor, the rehabilitation of the Benguela Railway, linking the port of Lobito to the mining belts of Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In December 2023, during a visit by João Lourenço to Washington, then U.S. President Joe Biden described the project as the largest U.S. rail investment ever in Africa. In 2024, concessionaire Lobito Atlantic Railway took over operation of the line, cutting the transport of copper from the DRC to the port of Lobito to about 6 days, roughly 30 days faster than by road. The corridor is still building toward the full value-added Angola is after. One logistics challenge, now well identified by the authorities, is cutting the number of wagons that still run empty toward the border. But it already positions the country as an unavoidable regional logistics hub, a decisive non-oil asset for decades to come, and a central piece of the regional integration the Economic Coordination Team has sought to deepen with Zambia and the DRC. Five, coordinating reform from the center of government. In June 2023, João Lourenço created, around José de Lima Massano, the post of Minister of State for Economic Coordination, designed to align the central bank, the finance ministry, and sectoral ministries behind a single diversification agenda. Among the measures he has coordinated are the simplification of administrative procedures, the gradual liberalization of financial flows, including capital and dividend repatriation, which no longer requires prior BNA authorization, and the easing of visa requirements for investors and tourists, part of a broader effort to consolidate what the minister calls greater macroeconomic stability. In October 2025, he presented the country's proposed 2026 state budget, worth nearly $36 billion, 4.7% below the current one. In May 2026, in Kigali, he represented the president at the Africa CEO Forum, where he pitched agriculture, energy, logistics, and manufacturing as the new pillars for attracting private investment. José de Lima Massano, Angola's Minister of State for Economic Coordination, speaking at the Africa CEO Forum in Kigali in May 2026. Angola is committed to building a more predictable and competitive business environment underpinned by structural and irreversible reforms.
But when you look to a macroeconomic level, you can see what's coming. When you see unemployment falling, when you see inflation falling, when you see the business environment improving, more private investment come into the country, those are good signs that are telling us, okay, we are in the right direction, and we have to keep on pursuing and making sure that whatever we promise that we are delivering.
Angola by the numbers, 7 readings of diversification. Beyond the narrative, the numbers tell the story more precisely than any speech, although increasingly it is the government's own economic team that anticipates them in speeches first. We have grouped by theme the data that team, from the Finance Ministry to the Ministry of State for Economic Coordination, via the Tax Authority, AGT, and the Central Bank, has put on the table over the past 2 years in the same language of macroeconomic stability and more diversified growth that José de Lima Massano repeats from Kigali to Namibe. 1. Angola's headline numbers. The macro picture is well known. GDP growing 4.4% in 2024 and 5.32% in the first quarter of 2026. Oil still accounting for 94% of exports. Inflation decelerating. But there is a less cited number that captures the shift in the country's center of gravity. In 2023, the oil sector contributed roughly $10.3 billion to state coffers, 60% of fiscal revenue, and non-oil contributed roughly $7 billion, 40%. A ratio that, a decade ago, was almost unthinkable, according to Angola's own tax authority. And non-oil revenue keeps accelerating. In the first half of 2025 alone, it totaled nearly $4 billion, with the Katoka diamond mine among the top contributors. 2. The numbers behind economic diversification. Non-oil GDP growth accelerated from 5.3% in 2024 to 7.34% in the fourth quarter of 2025 and 6.22% in the first quarter of 2026. A trajectory that, in the Economic Coordination Team's own reading, confirms that economic diversification is something that has to happen and is no longer just a policy aspiration, but a statistical fact repeating quarter after quarter. The business fabric reflects that shift. The number of new businesses created rose from 2,700 in 2012 to 38,715 in 2022, more than 14 times as many, and cooperatives with access to financial and technical services climbed from 240 to 12,870 over the same period, according to the African Development Bank. Non-oil fiscal revenue kept pace, rising from roughly $6 billion in 2019 to roughly $7 billion in 2023. Average annual growth of about 20% in local currency terms since the tax reform began in 2010. And 91% of the tax incentives granted by the Angolan state are now concentrated in the non-oil sector, a sign that fiscal policy is designed to accelerate diversification, not just track it. 3. How agriculture is growing. Agriculture is the sector that best illustrates the shift. It accounted for 13% of GDP in 2017 and stands at roughly 19% today, growing at an average annual rate of 6%, above the economy-wide average. The 2024/2025 farming season produced roughly 21.2 million tons of food output, up 5% on the 18 million tons of the previous season, according to official data compiled by INE. Coffee is the most visible case of that recovery. Exports rose from 2,165 tons in 2024, plus 51% on 2023, to 3,288 tons in 2025, with projections of 13,717 tons in 2026 and 14,513 tons in 2027. The provinces of Uiga, 49.4% of output, and Kwanza Sul, 45%, account for almost all national production, and about 78% of Angolan coffee still comes from smallholders, not large plantations. This is precisely the domestic production that, in Minister of State José de Lima Massano's own formulation, should ease the inflationary pressures still weighing on Angolans' cost of living. 4. The strategy behind smallholder farming. If agriculture is growing, it is in large part because the state chose to explicitly back the smallholder farmer, not just large-scale agribusiness. The central instrument is the Family Farming Acceleration and Food Security Program, known as OCYETU, with roughly $106 million of planned investment for the 2023 to 2026 three-year period, targeting 196,000 hectares of cultivated land, a harvest of 3,557,000 tons of basic basket products, and more than 660,000 farming families as direct beneficiaries. The program includes the creation of a single registry of family farmers to identify and track who receives state support and financing through the Agricultural Development Support Fund, FADA, of light mechanization, such as 6 two-wheel tractors and 8 tractors worth roughly $500,000 delivered to farmers in Luanda province. The same logic of technical training and decentralized financing that Mucafe has applied since 2023 to the coffee chain. 5. Agro-industry, livestock, and fisheries. The blue economy takes the stage. Upstream of smallholder farming, the state has also bet on larger-scale agro-industrial hubs. Biocom in Kakuso, Malanje province, is now described as Angola's largest non-oil investment. It farms roughly 30,000 hectares of sugarcane and was responsible in 2023 for 51% of national sugar demand and 30% of ethanol demand. A new outgrower program, launched in 2024, brings in another 10,000 hectares of smallholders around the Kapanda agro-industrial hub, with applications being selected through 2026, aiming to lift sugar self-sufficiency to 70%. In livestock, the national herd, according to INE data updated through June 2025, is led by goats at between 3.7 million and 5.6 million head, followed by poultry at between 4.2 million and 5.1 million, and cattle at between 3.1 million and 4.4 million head, a sector dominated by family farming, much like agriculture. In poultry specifically, there is still considerable room to grow. In Huila province, farms produced 3.36 million eggs in 2024, a promising starting point for a market that needs 35.8 million, and one the government has flagged as one of the next frontiers for import substitution. The increase in the national minimum wage from roughly $77 to $110 a month since September 2025 is already strengthening households' purchasing power and demand for domestically produced poultry. In fishing, national output exceeds 1.1 million tons of catch a year, led by sardine and horse mackerel, with more than 212,000 artisanal fishing operations producing about 1.15 million tons and a high rate of commercialization, according to INE's Fisheries Statistical Yearbook. It is this potential that José de Lima Massano has sought to turn into something bigger. In June 2026 in Namibe, he challenged entrepreneurs and investors to build a genuine national maritime industry, championing a blue economy vision that goes beyond fishing and cargo transport to capture the full value chain tied to Angola's roughly 1,650 kilometers of Atlantic coastline. Shipbuilding and repair, equipment and fishing gear manufacturing, aquaculture, and specialized services. José de Lima Massano, Angola's Minister of State for Economic Coordination, speaking at the National Conference on Maritime Labor in Namibe, Angola, June 20-26. It is not enough to exploit the resources of the sea. That potential must be turned into industry, innovation, and knowledge.
Foi neste sentido que Sua Excelência, o Presidente da República, João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, reafirmou recentemente a determinação de Angola em reduzir a dependência do petróleo e construir uma economia assente em setores com elevado efeito multiplicador, capazes de gerar emprego, criar riqueza, valorizar as comunidades locais e reforçar a projeção internacional do país.
6. What public policy has delivered for Angolans? This logic has translated into concrete public policy choices. A 25% increase in public sector wages under the 2025 budget, partly financed by savings from the fuel subsidy cuts. A national minimum wage almost 43% higher, from roughly $77 to $110 a month since September 2025. Reinforcement of the Quenda program, which makes direct cash transfers to the poorest families. Expansion of the National School Meals program, tied to rising domestic farm output, and the creation of credit lines dedicated to agriculture and tax relief for industrial equipment. The most visible result for ordinary citizens is inflation. After topping 31% in August 2024, it eased to about 10% year-on-year by June 2026, one of the sharpest declines in the region. Unemployment, meanwhile, fell from 30.8% to 26.9% between the third quarter of 2024 and the same period of 2025, with more than 1.38 million newly employed people. Formalizing employment, currently 20% of the total, is the government's next stated goal, with new credit and small business support programs already underway. 7. What tax policy has delivered? Diversification has also been deliberately engineered through the tax system. The general corporate income tax rate, Imposto Industrial, fell from 35% until 2014 to 30% and then to the current 25%. In the primary sector, agriculture, fisheries, the rate is even lower. It dropped from 15% to 10%. A direct incentive to attract private capital into farming in a sector the Economic Coordination Team itself describes as a natural frontier of diversification. VAT on food goods and agricultural inputs is set at 5%, against a general rate of 14%, the lowest in the SADC region alongside Mauritius. The Tax Benefits Code, compiled in 2022, added further deductions, accelerated depreciation and tax credits for small and medium-sized enterprises and for new private investment. This effort carries a clear fiscal cost, one the government fully owns. So-called tax expenditure, revenue the state forgoes by granting benefits, rose from 0.64% of GDP in 2018 to 2.9% in 2024, climbing from 3.1% to 17.17% of total tax revenue. Rather than a loss, the government presents this figure as a direct investment in diversification. Every dollar of uncollected tax is, in practice, capital left in the hands of Angolan companies to grow, hire, and export more. The institutions of diversification, 6 engines serving the private sector. Behind every percentage point of non-oil growth sits a network of public financing and business support institutions that the Economic Coordination Team has, in its own words, sought to fine-tune. 6 of them account for most of that effort: AIPEX, the FGC, FADA, INAPEM, the BDA, and FACRA. IPEX, the gateway for private investment. Created by Presidential Decree number 81/18, the Private Investment and Export Promotion Agency, AIPEX, is the public body that registers investment proposals, provides institutional support, and tracks the execution of projects and the internationalization of Angolan companies. In May 2024, it signed a partnership declaration with Portugal's AICEP to share best practices on trade missions, and it is through AIPEX that the government wants to help Angolan businesses explore the rest of the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, a bloc of 1.3 billion people with a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion, according to José de Lima Massano. FGC, the fund that unlocks credit. The Credit Guarantee Fund, FGC, created in 2022, closed 2025 with a net result of roughly $8.7 million, its best since inception, up 19.17% on the year before. Over the year, the fund guaranteed 10,648 projects across all 18 provinces, unlocking more than $159 million in financing and generating 21,778 jobs. Two lines account for most of that effort. LASMIC, dedicated to microcredit, has already backed more than 10,420 projects worth $17.1 million, and GAP has guaranteed 56 larger projects worth $67.4 million. FADA, mechanization reaches the small holding. The Agricultural Development Support Fund, FADA, is the main financing vehicle for family farming, which José de Lima Massano credits on its own with roughly 82% of national food output, involving about 3.1 million Angolans. In 2024 alone, the government planned to make some 2,300 two-wheel tractors available to farming families through the fund, alongside recruiting 400 more agricultural technicians to speed the spread of farming techniques across the country. In Luanda, FADA has already financed 6 two-wheel tractors and 8 tractors, worth roughly $500,000, delivered directly to farmers in the province. The only solution to sustainably lower inflation, and one we have been pursuing with determination, is to increase domestic production of widely consumed food. José de Lima Massano, Minister of State for Economic Coordination, Jornal de Angola, June 2024. INAPEM, the seal that professionalizes small business. The National Institute for Support to Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises, INAPEM, overseen by the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, had, as of April 2026, 49,542 companies certified with its MSME seal, almost half, 45%, of them in trade. In the past year alone, it certified 2,709 new companies, 1,730 micro, 561 small, and 418 medium-sized, with Luanda leading, 1,325, followed by Benguela, 186, and Huambo, 152. Over the past 2 years, the Institute has trained more than 80,000 entrepreneurs. Part of what José de Lima Massano describes as the financial, administrative, and operational support the state gives small companies that help widen the country's economic base. BDA, the Development Bank mid-recapitalization. The Banco de Desenvolvimento de Angola, BDA, disbursed roughly $111.8 million to the productive sector in 2024, a figure that fell to roughly $60.8 million in 2025, a 42.1% contraction tied to a recapitalization process and tighter prudential discipline. For 2026, the bank expects to selectively resume financing for agriculture, livestock, and fisheries, precisely the sectors the Economic Coordination Team identifies as engines of diversification. FACRA, venture capital for those starting small. The Angolan Venture Capital Fund, FACRA, created by Presidential Decree No. 108/12 of June 7th, invests directly in the capital of micro, small, and medium-sized companies at an early or expansion stage. It has invested in 10 companies to date. 6 remain in its current portfolio, securing 289 jobs maintained and created across the provinces of Bié, Benguela, Huambo, Huila, and Luanda, in sectors ranging from technology to logistics, agro-livestock innovation, and food processing. According to José de Lima Massano, FACRA has also backed logistics and transport operators to increase the means for collecting farm output and moving it to consumption areas. These 6 vehicles do not operate in isolation. In the 2024 state budget, the government approved roughly $388 million for sovereign guarantees designed to ease credit access for private business ventures, and gross credit extended to the economy grew 32% year-on-year through April that year to roughly $7.1 billion, according to BNA, data cited by the Minister of State himself. It is this institutional ecosystem that lies behind a list of import substitutions José de Lima Massano likes to enumerate. The country's largest brewer, now growing domestic barley after a successful pilot phase. Cooking oil now refined and packaged in Angola, diamond cutting done at greater scale, proprietary genetic lines for chicken production, school meals made with domestic produce, data now stored on an Angolan cloud, and national carrier TEAG, serving domestically produced beverages on international flights. Since 2024, public procurement for major building projects, schools, hospitals, new town centers, has, by government decision, favored windows, doors, and furniture made in Angola. Two further numbers help place this transformation in context. First, Angola climbed 12 places in the Index of Economic Freedom to 118th out of 180 countries, 19th in Africa, ahead of Brazil, driven largely by the broader visa exemptions approved in late 2023 and the execution of the 2023 to 2024 Business Environment Improvement Plan. Second, when INE updated its national accounts methodology in May 2024, moving from the 1993 to the 2008 system of national accounts, with the GDP base year shifting from 2002 to 2015, it found that Angola's GDP had been underestimated by roughly 13.31%, a reminder that the true size of the non-oil economy may still be understated in the official statistics. Consolidating the gains. Few petrostates manage what Angola is managing, turning a decades-long dependency into a starting point rather than a final destination. That is the success this report has tried to describe in numbers. It is fair to ask how resilient this second growth engine would prove against a fresh oil shock. And it is precisely that question that has shaped the reform agenda. The IMF, which tracks Angola's program closely, projects real GDP growth of 1.9% for 2025, a more moderate pace in a year of lower oil prices, and recommends the government stay the course on subsidy reform to further strengthen the fiscal buffer. It is precisely that institutional oversight and the discipline with which Angola has followed it that has led the IMF and the World Bank to recognize that Angola's diversification is real and deepening year after year. The pattern emerging from Luanda to Gabela, from Lobito to Kwanza Sul, is clear. Angola has swapped the spasmodic growth tied to the oil price for something more balanced, more plural, and, above all, more evenly spread across provinces and sectors. The country is demonstrably on track toward the diversified economy mapped out by the 2023 to 2027 National Development Plan and the long-term Angola 2050 strategy. And, for the first time in decades, it is a trend with a name, a date, and numbers that repeat and reinforce each other, quarter after quarter. What comes next? The 2023 to 2027 National Development Plan is structured around 7 pillars, 20 policies, and 79 programs, with sustainable economic diversification as one of 3 central pillars, alongside human capital development and infrastructure modernization. Over the next 2 years, the Ministry of State for Economic Coordination is expected to oversee the completion of PROPRIV's current phase, with new privatizations in banking and telecoms, and the completion of the fuel subsidy withdrawal, with budget savings of more than $2.8 billion. In July 2026, the BNA already cut its policy rate from 17% to 15.75% and revised its year-end inflation forecast down to 8.6%, opening room for cheaper credit to the non-oil sector. And, after a 5.32% start to the year, forecasters, including Oxford Economics and Standard Bank, have revised their full-year growth projections upward, even as oil output keeps contracting. For 2027, Mukafe's target is coffee production of 14,513 tons. And on the 2050 horizon, the long-term Angola 2050 strategy anchors the 2023 to 2027 National Development Plan and bets on consolidating the Lobito Corridor and the new Blue Economy as growth platforms for the decades ahead. If this were a television report, it would end on 3 images. A freight train pulling out of the port of Lobito, bound for the Zambian border, its horn echoing over the corridor that promises to reconnect the Atlantic to Africa's mineral heartland. A farmer in Gabela weighing sacks of Robusta coffee before selling them. For the first time, at a fair price, the new plant humming in the background. And, in Luanda, the central bank governor facing the cameras, announcing with a composure unthinkable 5 years ago, yet another cut to the interest rate. 3 images, 1 storyline. A country that has learned to grow without depending entirely on the price of oil. The answer, in 1 sentence. Angola achieved what it achieved, a non-oil sector that grew 6.22% in the first quarter of 2026, while oil output logged its 5th straight quarter of contraction. Through a determined combination of courageous currency reform, fiscal discipline, successful privatizations, and concrete sectoral bets on coffee, minerals, livestock, fisheries, and logistics, designed under João Lourenço's political vision and carried out with technical rigor by José de Lima Massano. It does not need to be a revolution to be transformative. It is, as the finance minister herself puts it, a consistent process, and one that is accelerating. It is, above all, the first sustained period in which Angola's growth has stopped being explained solely by the oil price in London or New York, and is increasingly explained by a coffee factory in Gabela, a train in Lobito, an interest rate cut in Luanda, and thousands of new cooperatives spread across the country's 18 provinces. It is proof that Angola no longer needs to wait for the oil price to grow.